Hey guys, today we're going to be doing another metagame recap on Resolution G. Today there was another online tour hosted by Victory Road. We covered the last one last week, and this time we had Zamazenta winning. Zama won by a Japanese player who top 4 worlds a while back. They go by Snow, and they have a new take on Zama with Chiyu, Flutter, and Amoonguss. Some pretty cool picks. Other things to note in this bracket is that Groudon was first seed again. Last week we had Joseph Ugarte, who had first seed with Groudon as well, and he also finished in top 8, funny enough, so they had the same ranking. Besides this, other thing to note is that there was a lot of Dozo that converted pretty well. Shadow Dozo here, and Miraidon Dozo here. And they all lost in top 16, but having 3 in top 16 is pretty impressive for the archetype. And besides that, everything else looks pretty standard. Like, Shadow Rider is dominating not just in the Dozo teams, but the balance teams with either Amoonguss or there's also DD variants when it isn't or not balanced. There's a lot of hyper offense actually. A lot of Tailwind, Calyrex-Shadow, Tailwind, Calyrex-Shadow Tornado, Whimsicott. There's also a Regidrago variant. And Zama won, and there was also a Zama that made in top 4 here. And besides that, Calyrex-Ice is kind of back, not really. There was only one top cut here, but it lost in top 16, which is a little disappointing, but definitely better than last week. Last week it had a way weaker showing, and I'll be going over that as well to see what happened to it. And Pogos also fell down a little bit in usage, same as Kyogre. But for the most part, these are pretty straightforward results. Like, a lot of the restricted you expect to do well, like Miraidon and Calyrex-Shadow are dominating. But Pogos is trending a little bit down. This probably has to do with Zama winning. And we can go over these teams a little bit more. But first, I want to go over the usage stats, because these are always interesting to look at. So Calyrex-Shadow was top usage. It dominated day 1 and day 2. 33% usage in day 2 is pretty good with 13 here. And there was like multiple on the top cut, like about 10 or so, right? Zama was second in usage and then winning, so no surprise there. The Terapagos, major drop off. There were 30 in day 1 and only 4 in day 2. Again, I think that this has to do with the trend of Zamazenta being second highest. It's just really hard to beat Zama with Pogos unless you get some lucky Thunder Waves or crits. Miraidon also had a pretty good conversion rate as well, or higher usage than usual, 18% compared to 13 here. And Calyrex-Ice, significantly higher than last week. Last week was only 3, and there was 0 in cut. This time there was 6, and there was 1 in top cut, and I think there were a few that fell just a bit short. Koraidon had a really bad time, but I'm not actually so sure why. With Pogos and Zamazenta being up there in usage, usually Koraidon should do better, but 0 made it through. So this one kind of shocked me a bit, but Groudon was able to go through. It wasn't as high usage here, but with a lot of Miraidon in the field, I'm not surprised that Groudon was able to top cut here. But let's get into the specifics of some of these teams. First, we should probably talk about Zamazenta itself, right? So Zama won by Snow, and Snow actually streamed his run, so I'll link his VOD in the description. But he streamed all his day 2 here with finals and all, so give that a watch. And in his stream too, he showed some of his EVs. And these are pretty straightforward for Zama, right? I mean, Scarf Chiyu, he has some bulk to live stuff like Aqua Jet from Urshifu, Terra Water Aqua Jet, and then Flutter Main, super bulky. You can live Surging Strikes. And then Rillaboom here for the Miraidon matchup, and this one's extremely strong, 252 attack, probably has something to do with Chen Pao. And Zama here is also really strong. Max defense, of course, to boost your body presses. Having enough speed for probably other Zamazentas. You also outspeed stuff like Chiyu and Lando already. This is probably speed creeping their Zamas at this point, right? And Amoonguss here is just max defense, just to optimize taking damage better against Urshifus and such, right? A lot of physical hits in the format. This Zama team is actually pretty interesting, because normally we usually see like Entei on this slot, and usually there's like Urshifu. Like Michael Kelch, for example, his Worlds team had Rilla, Flutter, Zampal, and the other 2 slots were Urshifu and Entei. So Snow here decided to opt for a different fire type and getting rid of the Urshifu completely, which I think makes sense in some regards. Getting rid of the Urshifu is a little bit scary because it's a great Chen Pao user and now you can't hit for Protect. But Amoonguss allows you to have a Dondozo matchup, which I'll get into later. There was one Dondozo in cut. And Chiyu here gives you a way better time versus stuff like Cali Shadow. It's still good versus Ice Rider comps. It's mainly for Shadow Rider. I think that Zama often struggles versus a lot of Shadow Rider builds. And from what I heard, this Chi was a menace versus a lot of Shadow Rider comps just because you have like Snarl, the fast Heat Waves and Dark Pulses, and yeah, really cool take on Zama as well. Like the body presses too, forcing the Ghost Terra, so you can more as a pin it, like the double Dark Pulse, a Throat Chop, Sucker Punch, even Shadow Ball. Like a lot of ways to take advantage of this Zamazenta. So really cool take on it. And I'm not really surprised that this did so well based on the field and the new techs for this archetype. Third place here, we have another Zamazenta team. It's pretty similar in how it's built. Like all these Zama teams will always have Zama Pal, right? This is like completely needed just to have that Sword of Rune body press and the dark type to cover for the ghost types for Zama, right? Rillaboom here is a different set with Miracle Seed, just taking advantage more of that Sword of Ruin. This is also because your Astalfus here is on Raging Bolt, so some different techs here. But Rillaboom is super important as well, just for again like Sword of Ruin and also even Miraidon matchup. It's really important to override terrain so Zama doesn't get KO'd by like stuff like Electro Drift. The different tech pieces here are the Annihilate, which is Scarf, which I find really interesting. Again, like usually just like an Urshifu, right, or a different physical attacker like Entei. But this person here opted for the Choice Card Annihilate, so you have coaching plus body press, which is really cool. You can also coach in your Ursha Chenpao and even your Heartflame. Really physical oriented team as well. And then you also have Final Game to get rid of threats you don't like. Like stuff you can't really remove with Zamazenta, sometimes you can just Final Game and blow them up. And yeah, again, like the coaching mode with 5 physical mons, it's pretty good. And then the Raging Bolt here, just I'm guessing it's more pressure for other Urshifus, and you can also get some Miraidon kind of well. Also Terra Fairy. So this version is interesting. They end up losing in the mirror. For when I saw, the Amoonguss was quite hard to get rid of, and Chiyu was also a bit oppressive as well. Just because it's kind of hard to swap Chiyu for this team, really. You only really have the AV Bolt and a Terra Dragon Sama, which they have the Booster Flutter to beat. So maybe not as good in the mirrors for Zamazenta, but they still end up doing quite well, and I think this is another interesting take if you want to try out Zamazenta yourself. There's also a bunch of Zamazens that did well as well in day 2. These ones here, they didn't make top cut, but they all went 7-3, so they're one game away from making top cut. This one I want to talk about. This is a variant of the Michael Couch team that we just mentioned earlier that did well at Worlds. The main difference here is the Amoonguss, like I said before, over the Rillaboom because of Dondozo. Dondozo being really trending right now on these Calyrex-Shadow comps and even some Miraidon comps is really bad for Zamazenta just because unaware you're ignoring the Dauntless Shield, right? So having a Amoonguss to just have that Spore pressure and be able to Sludge Bomb the Terra Grass. Dozos, I mean, forcing Terra in general on the Dozo is good, so you can Sludge Bomb it, ISO spin it, right, etc. So, and you can also remove like Toxic Spikes from like stuff like Wheezing, which is really nice. So I really like this adaptation was on teams for having Amoonguss because now you have a chance to beat Dondozo. Just before, like Dondozo will just farm you. Like I know Justin Knox, for example, beat Michael Kelch with his Dondozo team at Worlds. So that's probably why adaptation they had this. I also know that Prez is good friends with Michael, so this is probably what they built together. So pretty cool adaptation. The only other change is really the Urshifu form. The dark form here is probably just to beat Shadow Rider. With Rapid Strike, you can't take Astral Barrage quite well. The only Pokemon that can really take Astral Barrage is the Chenpao, and then you also Terra Normal Entei plus Wyguard, but no like natural resistance that really want to take it. Chenpao's too frail and also doesn't want its focus touch broken a lot of times. Urshifu can at least take 2 and like KO back with a Wicked Blow. So this is actually a pretty cool change. Other ones to talk about is the Iron Defense set. This one is kind of funny. Nash, a Korean player, piloted this, and they went 7-3. Like again, normally it's always the Wyguard set just because there's so much spread moves in the format with Astral Barrage, Dazzling Gleam from Miraidon, Glacial Lance, but this one opted for Iron Defense. So now you have a setup option that Zamazenta teams don't usually have. So this is kind of cool because like after Iron Defense, it's a little bit better in the mirror actually, just because if you stack one up, you can deal more damage back to other Zamas, and you're taking way less from their partners, right? Like someone Chenpao that can carry Sacred Sword, etc. And this one also opts for Terra Water as well. So you don't get pinned by stuff like Flutter, but you are weak to stuff like Raging Bolt and Rilla when you Terra, so you got to be careful of that. I still don't really get why it's not Wyguard, because I feel like Wyguard still supports the team quite well, because a lot of these Pokemon don't appreciate stuff like Glacial, like Bolt, Rilla, or even stuff like Astral Barrage, like Flutter, and Zama itself, right? But they did go 7-3 with it, and I think that if you want to try Iron Defense on them, you can try this. But I still recommend going Wide Guard just because it has the results for it. It also has like more use cases in the meta, in my opinion. Next is the Talon Zama team. I did a tier list yesterday, if you guys saw that, and I didn't have Talonflame quite high, just because I said that Whimsicott is just a way better Talon mon in this format. I think the Talonflame is just really here because maybe they just want to Wisp. Not Prankster Wisp, but just having Wisp in general. Like, fast Wisp is good to burn stuff like opposing Zamazenta and Urshifu. And I guess it just fits the pacing of teamwork because it gives you Tailwind, so you have Zamazenta here to use Tailwind, and Urshifu here. Like, Tailwind plus Surge Strike is always strong combo. And the main reason why I'm guessing, again, like, they want to go Talon for Wisp. Torn doesn't get Willow Wisp, so you're still weak to stuff like Urshifu Zama. So that's my only reason why I think they would have it here. It's an interesting pick for sure. Tornadus, I think, would also do the job here, but here we have Talonflame, so why not? Other weird picks here is probably the Ogerpon. Ogerpon's usually not seen on these Zamazenta teams, like I said before, like Dondozo. I would see that this team probably struggles a little bit for Dondozo, but you do have Will-O-Wisp to kind of, I guess, counter it a little bit. But yeah, this is a very creative take on Zamazenta here, and if you want to try again, like another creative team here with the pieces, you can try this one out. Next thing to talk about is Calyrex-Shadow. Calyrex-Shadow dominated Victory Road here, and it did make finals. This is like the most standard version of Calyrex-Shadow, like kind of a week 1, right? Nowadays, you usually see Heartflame over Amoonguss, but Amoonguss is still a good pick here because with Cover Cloak, you can't get faked out, and not a lot wants to Spore in a format, right? Like, all the instants are going like Rocket Helmet right now, so you get to Spore that. You get the Spore like all the restricted, like Zamazenta, Calyrex-Shadow, Caly-Ice. Really good Caly-Ice check because it is set check before you can Spore them. And again, really good Zamazenta answer. But I think the main issue why they still lost to Zamazenta in finals was because Chi-Yu, right? Chi-Yu is notoriously good versus Amoonguss, Rillaboom, Calyrex-Shadow here. So I saw the game, and what Snow was able to do was force an early Terra and Amoonguss, and then KO Body Press, and then Chi-Yu plus Zamazenta, and then was able to kind of clean up everything because they burnt Terra on this. They couldn't carry Shadow Rider, so they died a Sucker Punch, and it was just really hard for them to position around that. Overall, like, this team is really strong, but also really boring. It has a pretty good matchup spread versus a lot of things, like stuff like most Zamazenta builds without Chi-Yu. I would say this is pretty good versus, and it's also really good versus like a lot of Miraidon comps. So still a very strong team, but it does quite struggle versus Chi-Yu in particular, which it did lose to in finals. Next, we got to talk about all the Dozo teams. We'll start off with this variant here. This is the pretty standard one going around. The Order Up with the defense boosting Body Press after Order Up. Just because you stack up your defense boosters and Body Press really racks up after Poison. Because you can't kill this guy, and then you poison the field, and then this is almost unkillable, and the Body Presses will eventually stack up and kill you with the Poison Chip. And these guys are always paired with the Calyrex-Shadow just because it's just oppressive. You can lead versus Calyrex-Shadow Weezing almost every game, trade Barrage plus Poison Gas, clean up with Dozagiri. This is usually your main game plan. And nowadays, all these adaptations have been running Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon's a pretty cool tech because I'm assuming it helps more in the mirror, especially the Dozo mirror, just be able to knock off the leftovers or knock off the other Calyrex-Shadow is really good. Justin Knox, who was probably the trendsetter of this team because he top 16 worlds with it, his variant still had these 4, but the last 2 pieces were Indeedee and Scarf Urshifu. So very similar in a way where you have a fast mon that can move first, in this case it's Roaring Moon instead of Urshifu, and Indeedee as a redirect instead of Ogerpon. So it fits similar roles, but I think Roaring Moon does the job a little bit better because it's more efficient in the mirror and also gives you Tailwind. You could also lead something like Tailwind plus Calyrex-Shadow, right? Tailwind plus Astral Barrage or Knockoff plus Barrage. A very strong combination as well. And I think these teams are doing really well right now because it's good versus most Zamazenta builds. It's good versus most Caly-Ice. Actually, every Caly-Ice probably falls to this, to be honest. But I think this actually lost to Zamazenta because, like I mentioned before, the Amoonguss adaptation. If you want a good way to beat Dondozo, Amoonguss is one of your best ways just because you eat the spikes and you can Spore this you which is really good. You still gotta be careful with stuff like Psychic on Cali, but if you protect it well, your Amoonguss can go crazy. The other variation here is it's basically the same thing. Yeah, it is the same build. It's also Terra Normal here, but the main difference is hands over Ogerpon. The hands here allows you to have a better Miraidon matchup. Just because Hands Weezing can single-handedly beat most Miraidon teams because you shut down the terrain, and then Hands can beat a lot in the mirror. be able to resist Miraidon, and you can also hit down other hands pretty hard. So another cool take on it. I think the Cornerstone one is a little bit better, just because it gives you another Spore immunity to Follow Me. Hands just is more teched out for Miraidon if you're struggling for that. Other variations of Calyrex-Shadow have been the Tailwind variants. The balance comps didn't do as amazing like before, like for example on the Mungus variants. They dominated before the last Victory Road with either Mungus or Heartflame. This was definitely way more common. It ended up being in finals still, but the rest of Cut were all Tailwind offense with Torrent and Whimsicott, which I found really interesting. This one here had Mousehold by Yuki, and Mousehold's kind of a cool pick because I mentioned this yesterday in my tier list, but they usually pair it with Mousehold plus CSR because you have Feint plus Astral, and you can't protect in front of that, which is really strong. And you can also use the Mousehold just to taunt things, like taunting down Trick Room, so you can't get faked out here. You taunt it. It's usually Rocky Helmet, but Cobra Coat's kind of cool too because you can lead this guy in front of Incineroar a lot easier. And DD is pretty straightforward. You get the Calyrex-Shadow Expanding Force, and that's another way you can run Calyrex, right? Being a very strong DD abuser, and then having that fast E-Force plus Astros is so much strong spread damage. If your opponent has no Y Guard, they're going to just drop in 2 hits, or even 1. Urshifu here is just really good against a Torn, like Torn Ursh. Torn Ursh you can lead versus a lot of teams that don't have Raging Bolt, and you can clean it with Tailwind plus Surging or Raiden as plus Surging. So yeah, this is a pretty cool take to the Calyrex stuff. The Mousehold's interesting because you already have an DD, but having double normal means you have more ways to beat the mirror, because this is also Terra Dark. Terra Dark Calyrex plus double normal means you can sit in front of Calyrex and just trade damage better than them. So pretty cool take. Next here is another Calyrex variant. I covered a pretty similar variant last week. I don't believe this one here had Regidrago, but Regidrago is here to beat most Fire Wild Grass, right? You beat Incineroar Ursh pretty well, Drago. The main issue of Drago is if you face like multiple fairy types. One of my friends, Kian, faced Alamac, and he had a Zacian team. And of course, like Zacian's like notorious good versus like Regidrago. And I found out it was hard for him to break that when I was watching the VOD. But also like stuff like Miraidon Terrafair, Raging Bolt Terrafair would give this a lot of issues. Which, you know, that's why you have your other partners, but I feel like Drago is really weird in the current metagame because of that. So you got pushing it pretty well, and you do have Terra Steel Blast like I see here, but it means you have to Terra it. And usually when the Shadow Rider comes, you won't be tearing your Shadow Rider because it's not as bulky, and you want to take certain hits better from it. So it's still a really strong Tailwind team though. You can definitely overrun your opponents that don't have their own Tailwind or their own Terra Fairies for it. But I could see this struggling versus maybe certain Miraidon comps as well, because Terra Fail and Dazzling Gleam, I don't see any resistance to this, so that could be quite hard. The last few teams I want to talk about were still dominating in Victory Road, but they weren't nearly as common, right? Like I think this Victory Road here tour had mostly Zamazenta and Shadowride teams do well. But next one I want to talk about here was Groudon, because Groudon ended up first seed here still, so I think it's still important to talk about. And Joseph Ugarte, who created this 6, also top 8 the last one, and it was a very similar build. It was the same 6, but the only differences was Terra Dark Ursh. Ogerpon had Woodhammer instead of Bullet Seed, and Groudon was high horsepower, and Instant was safety goggles. So the Japanese player who took this team made some changes, and they also lost to Zamazenta, which I was talking to Joe about it, and Joe was saying if he had high horsepower, he can get around Wide Guard, and that was really the main difference. Like if you had higher horsepower instead of bulk up, you can get around Wide Guard, which this team would otherwise struggle versus Zamazenta. Other variations, like the Rocky Helmet Instant's kind of cool if you're not worried about the Mungus matchup. I know Joe had it, so he could beat Calyrex-Ice and Mungus lead a lot easier. Like, yes, you have Ogerpon to follow me, but they can always Rage Powder away your Wisp with your Helmet. So it's definitely preference and depends on if you're schedule dependent, right? Helmet has more value when you're not facing Mungus teams. But if you do face it, then you're going to struggle a bit more. The only thing else to really know about this team is the Bullet Seed. The Bullet Seed's kind of cool because you can KO Sass Urshifu after you get attack boost. Without the attack boost, you need to land 4 hits, and without loaded dice, your odds are a little bit lower. So I believe you need Terra to get the 2-shot, with just 2 Bullet Seeds on it, which is kind of cool. This team, like I said before, it was definitely first seed for a reason. It dominated in the field of a lot of Miraidon and a lot of CSR. I think this comp's also really good for CSR because you have the Dark Urshifu here, and you also have the Terra Dark jump off of Sleep Powder. So yeah. And again, Miraidon. We're talking Miraidon now. There was a Miraidon top 4, there's one in top 8, and there's a few in top 16. The main thing I want to talk about was all the ones that did well. The main difference was the Dark Urshifu. The one that Luca won Worlds with was Rapid Strike. And I mentioned this a little bit before in my other recap, but Rapid Strike is better versus like Chen Pao and Zamazenta. Dark Ursh was better versus Calyrex-Shadow Rider. So the ones that did better, I think, with Dark Ursh, or the only ones that were cut were Dark Ursh, was because Shadow Rider was dominating the field. With Dark Ursh, you have a way to resist Astro Barrage and pressure normal Terra plus their regular Terra with Wicked Blow better, right? You can force them to Terra. If they Terra, you close combat them. If they don't, they die Wicked Blow. So overall smart adjustment to the current metagame. I think either could work. With Zamazenta winning, I could see maybe Rapid Strike coming back more in usage just because it's better versus that. But if you want to be better versus CSR, you run Single Strike. And the only other thing to mention about Miraidon is Dondozo. Dondozo again dominated with CSR. You usually see it with only Cali Shadow, like Weezing stuff. But the other way you can run Dondozo is with Miraidon. This variant here, Top 8 Worlds by Mitsu. And it's the AV Miraidon, which is really cool, like super bulky. So you can kind of like protect Dozo and Volt Switch out, or you can Volt Switch stay in with Dozo and like Wave Crash when Tatsu swaps in. Like very strong core like that. Dragonite on this team is good versus Fire, Water, Grass cores. Stuff like, it's better versus Rillaboom, which Miraidon doesn't like. You also have Chi, the pressure Rillaboom, and Goldengo. The only changes about this team is Mitsu at Worlds was Terra Steel, while this person here opts for Terra Normal. And Terra Normal allows you to deal with Shadow Rider a bit better. So, yeah, still a very strong team. I still think it does struggle versus some instant comps, like instant Rilla comps. You gotta play kind of careful. And also Amoonguss, right? With Amoonguss kind of winning and picking up more in usage, you gotta be careful about that. But the bright side about this team is, unlike the Weezing comps, right? Miraidon has the terrain to shut down spores. So you can probably play around Amoonguss a little bit better versus this. But it still ended up losing top 16. So while Dozo is very strong, it is still exploitable if you have the certain tools for it. The last few teams we want to talk about is Combine Pagos. Again, Pagos did not do amazing this tour, right? Only 4 here, but 1 did make cut here. And it's the standard one that won the last Victory Road Tour. And I think this has kind of shown that this is by far the best Pagos team. It's the most consistent in how it is to how to support it. Like you Follow Me plus Calm Mind, the double Fake Out plus Urshifu Core or Fake Out plus Calm Mind. Really fast speed control and booster Flutter. Icy Wind plus Thunder Wave is good support. And also have Taunt here to shut down Trick Room or Spores. So if you want to use Pagos, this is how you do it. But I think that the only reason why it underperformed in this format, for this tournament, is because of the field. Like we are playing a metagame where restricted A beats restricted B, and we're kind of doing a resolving circle on what beats what, and sometimes one restricted will shine this week, but the next week it might fall off in usage because all of a sudden, let's say Zamazenta is trending, right, like it did now. So I still think this is a very strong Pagos team, and it's going to be the strongest Pagos team, I think, by the next regional, and I think the rest of the format, this is going to be the Pagos team. So definitely expect to see this still, but it just didn't have the performance for this just because of the current field. Similarly, right, like Calm Mind Kyogre, similar to Calm Mind Pagos, this is the default Kyogre team, I think, for the format. It's just so good versus like Calyrex-Ice. You have a Zamazenta matchup with Amoonguss, a Dondozo matchup with Amoonguss as well. Versus Miraidon, you have the double grass core, right? Being able to shut down terrain, being able to spore in grassy terrain, right? Roaring Moon checks a lot of Kyogre's weaknesses. Being able to get rid of grass types for it. Scarf Urge to abuse the rain. Overall, really strong team. I think the main downsides of Kyogre, though, is that it is weak to it's still weak to like Terapagos in a way, because like Instant Rilla Urge can fake out you to Kyogre and then force you to Terra, and then Kyogre can't use the rain well because Calm Mind Pagos can Stellar Terra, get rid of rain, and hit you for super effective. It also doesn't appreciate Fire Upon the format. I think like Fire Upon Terapagos team above this, right? I think it beats the Kyogre team pretty hard. Like I don't really see how they can play around. It's almost unplayable. I was talking to Michael Kelsch, who ran his team for an online tournament as well, and he was saying that the Pagos matchup is almost unplayable. Not so sure how you beat it, but like you can't beat everything in the format, and that's just something we gotta accept. So if you think that Pagos is not going to be doing amazing for one tournament, you can try Kyogre, or you can hope your schedule is good enough where you dodge the Pagos matchup and you can beat everything else. And lastly, I want to talk about Calyrex-Ice. My last recap, I talked about how bad Calyrex-Ice was in current format, and it still didn't really perform well. Like only 1 made cut here, And I want to talk about, of course, the one that made cut and also the future of Calyrex, because there's a few that also did well, and also talk about other ways you can run Calyrex in the future. Starting off with the one that top cut. This one made top 16, right? Yep, made top 16, 10th here. And this is a Hirofumi's team from Worlds. Hirofumi ran this exact same 6. You can watch him play versus Wolfclick on stream. I think it was round 1 of day 1. No, round 1 of day 2. And the main difference here is that the Calyrex is clear inlet instead of never melt ice. Hirofumi here was never melt ice at Worlds. And this is because Incin had pretty little usage at Worlds at the time. And also that never melt ice was a lot better for stuff like Miraidon because they didn't carry Intimidate. While clear inlet's definitely more consistent versus the definitely like the trend of Incin's going up and up, right? Because stuff like Terapagos is trending, stuff like Calyrex-Shadow Balance is trending. So clear inlet's a smart change because there's not as much like Miraidon or no Intimidate on the field now. But yeah, I think that's a smart change for the future. The rest is pretty straightforward. You have Flutter Chi for your Shadow Rider matchup, Raging Bolt for Urshifu, your own Sash Ursh is better in the Calyrex mirror and for Zamazenta, and Cornerstone's really impressive with Calyrex. Like, I think this is one of the strongest Calyrex builds, but it still has troubles versus Zamazenta, just because Zamazenta kind of hits his whole team, like Cornerstone, Chi-Yu, Flutter, and Calyrex, right? And I believe that even with Flutter Chi-Yu, this team still doesn't really appreciate Incin really like Calyrex-Shadow. You really only have Flutter Chi, so if you lose your Chi-Yu, Calyrex-Shadow can really snowball. Like, if you want to see how like Wolf played it, like Wolf was using Shadow Rider Balance, and he kind of smoked Hirofumi in a way. Like, all he had to do was position his Terrify Rilla, and then endgame with Calyrex-Shadow, and then like the Chi-Yu couldn't do much because it died to Ursh later. So it's still like strong for Calyrex, but I don't know how much like further Calyrex can go in the current metagame. It's sort of in a weird spot where I believe that before it was dominating and multiple top cuts, but now there's only one. And I thought like maybe I could have been proven wrong and someone would cook with Calyrex, but the only Calyrex team that really did well was something we saw already at Worlds, and it didn't even like win Worlds at all. So I'm not so sure where the build will go from here. Besides maybe faster variants, like Flutter Chi is one way you can run it. There's also like Aleki Lando, which I want to talk about. Like Flutter Chi is one way of doing it. Like Aleki Lando is very similar. Instead of Icy One, you have E-Webs plus like Earth Power. Like having a way to remove Incin with Lando is really nice, which Calyrex isn't like. And you also have ways to negate Calyrex-Shadow with like Fergaraf. Like having at least like one Terra Normal or one normal type to resist it is pretty cool. And then of course the Cornerstone Ursh core I think is pretty important. Like having Follow Me plus Ursh is completely needed for Calyrex. It's either a Mungus or a Cornerstone. So yeah, you either go really fast with Calyrex to think like to keep up the metagame, or you go really slow. This one didn't make cut, but it went 7-3. It also had a 6-4. There were two of the same team here. Yeah, 6-4 here, and then 7-3 here, 20th here. So two of the same teams, Hard Trick and Calyrex. And instead of going fast, you have the Hard Tricker mode with Follow Me plus Trick Room, 2 Follow Me users, and then 3 normal types. Having 3 normal types plus actually another Astro Resist with Urshifu is a great way of shutting down Shadow Rider. As I mentioned before in my Calyrex video, Shadow Rider is Calyrex's like biggest op. So having ways to kind of negate the damage with either like Fergaraf or Blood Moon or Blood Moon DDs plus Smeargle, right? That's a lot of ways to shut it down. Cons of this team, I think that Zamazenta does give us some issues with Wide Guard in particular, right? You also have a Mungus and Trick Room. Like now that these Zamazenta teams are carrying a Mungus, you can't set up Trick Room freely, and you're able to spore most of this team, right? The Dark Ursh probably helps you a little Terra Grass, but they can still play around that. So, strong team for Calyrex if you're going to go like really, really slow, but it's definitely exploitable if they have stuff like Rillaboom plus like a Mungus, right? Also stuff like Min Speed Iron Hands, I think can shut this down quite easily. But yeah, I mean, that's really it about the meta updates. Not really much has changed, besides new variation of certain teams like Zamazenta. Besides that, a lot of stuff that we've seen before have been around, but slightly changes some little tweaks, but I think Regulation G for the rest of the format's going to kind of be like this, right? Next week, we might have Chopper goes back in the metagame, like up top usage, or maybe Calyrex-Shadow still be dominating top usage, right? Other weeks, we might even have Calyrex will shoot back up towards the end of the format, right? It's going to be very unpredictable in a certain way, but we already know what's on top. It's just going to depend on how the week is going to rotate. So, yeah, that's going to be really it. what do you guys think that it's going to be trending next for next tournament and such? Let me know in the comments. But that's going to be for today. And hopefully you guys enjoyed the analysis stuff. I want to thank you again for 1K and all the love I'm getting for the last few videos. But yeah, it's been a great time here on YouTube so far. So love you guys, and I'll catch you later. Bye-bye.